Hello.
Our story begins with a mission deep into the Outer Rim to stop an energy crisis from worsening. In the mid-70s BBY, the galaxy was falling on the cusp of a Cold War with the energy tycoons that controlled a majority of distribution in the galaxy. The Republic and the Jedi were unaware of the Sith's involvement in this, but their direct influence led to this strain on the system. Chancellor Panther of the Galactic Republic directly requested for the High Council to dispatch one of their best negotiators to broker a deal between the Republic and the energy tycoons. Typically, this work would go directly through the Senate, but the committees on energy immunity and energy independence were reluctant to fight the powerhouse corporations. Unlike a company like the Commerce Guild that expanded around the galaxy, the energy tycoon wasn't one full company. Instead, the wealthiest man in the galaxy, east of Alderaan, had called together the most influential fuel distributors in the Outer Rim. Since most of the supply came from the Outer Rim, and demand was in the core, Mid-Rim and Inner Rim, the man known as Mr. Jetral suggested to other fuel corporations that they test the limits of the Republic. Not to say that they could barter for better deals per barrel, but he wanted total monopolization over the propellant industry. He used the model of the Techno-Union or intergalactic banking clans as inspiration. They had ultimate control, total end-to-end dominance over this sector of the market. Mr. Jetral understood that the Energy Immunity Committee would protect them from harsher taxes, while the Energy Independence Commission would ensure the government didn't take control over their assets. It also helped that Jetral funded many senators and representatives that held valuable positions on each of those panels, so the Senate would likely be reluctant to challenge the construction of a new mega corporation. It was quite simple in mind, and the Chancellor, well, he was like the rest of them. He always saw profit in it for himself. Mr. Jetral assumed that Chancellor Panther realized how long he had let the problem fester. It was almost entirely too late to rectify it without sending the Jedi in, and that's what the High Council did. The Mon Calamari Jedi Master arrived on the planet of Chelta. It was a system just outside of Hutt space and under Republic jurisdiction. Yet unlike the system of Quen or Toydaria, this one didn't face the wrath of pirate raids from the Hutts. Instead, it was permitted to operate freely, because there were always benefits for the crime lords. A Pike sponsor that coordinated with other systems around the Outer Rim to block off the fuel trade from the Republic was also here, though the Jedi Master was unaware of their presence. His mission was to meet with one of the main distributors of energy in the galaxy. Queen Iliogra wasn't just a wealthy monarch, but she had a dalliance with Mr. Jetral. It was one of those things that people knew about yet turned a blind eye towards. Iliogra and Jetral both saw the personal satisfaction of this relationship and the financial one. As a royal might marry off a child of theirs to another royal family, this was the binding of two dominant Outer Rim forces, ones with a lock on the power energy industry. To no one's surprise, at least the Jedi Master's, she was very unhappy to see him. It might not have been his fault, but Chancellor Panther had been trying to catch Iliogra and Jetral on their bluff by placing embargoes on fuel. His hopes were to scare off the corporations by relying on the Republic's power reserve, but it didn't work. Starliners and personal transports were slowly becoming too expensive to use. The demand couldn't be met, and thus, the price skyrocketed. In the Outer Rim and with the crime syndicates, this wasn't a shared problem. Queen Iliogra had a good relationship with many in the Outer Rim. She caught everyone's attention, even the unsuspecting Jedi Master. In his stoic and negotiable tone, the Mon Cala Jedi explained that he could not take the embargo off the table. She knew that the Council didn't have influence over the Republic. The Queen, at this, tempted him with the idea of forming his own coalition within the Senate. He should know by now, as the legendary negotiator that he was, that the energy panels wouldn't support the Republic, in return for their own personal investments, of course. They wanted to be paid. If he couldn't promise them that, then the energy crisis could only be exasperated. With a shrug of her shoulders, she sent him away, knowing a full truth and letting him define the resolution himself. As a result of the meeting gone wrong, he sent all the details back to the High Council on Coruscant. They all knew this mission was a waste of time and fuel, but it had to be done, to prove that the Jedi were still loyal to the Republic. Master Yoda didn't need Chancellor Panther threatening an external review over them for being an unchecked religious power again. While the Mon Cala Jedi was preparing to leave, his ship was bombed. The saber ignited. From above, a bounty hunter fired a sniper rifle down on him. First, his shoulder was hit, but he deflected more shots back at her before being domed in the head by a rifle. His body dropped, and the Pike sponsor, who watched the entire thing, prepared to inform the Jedi of what he saw. Above him, where the assassin sat, she opened a hologram. Lord Tenebras was on the other end, and he asked Evermati if her mission was a success. With a nod of her head, she watched her wrist activate with a sudden beep. The payment was received. She thanked the Biff man and ended the call. She was a Sith-aligned assassin, taking out Jedi whenever her name was called. The Mon Cala Jedi was her 7th kill. Of course, it is easier to kill a Jedi when you're death from above, but bounty hunters didn't play to lose. They played to get paid, and she just didn't. While Tenebras finished up the first steps of his plan on Chelta, his apprentice Plagueis was in the middle of a board meeting with Mr. Jetral and several other members of various fuel tycoons. Hago Damas II was leveraging the powerful Trade Federation and some of his own assets to bring these minor corporations into one monopoly. Obviously, Jetral had the most influence in the energy game, but he carried himself with poise, and as a switch hitter, he had no problem taking advantage of anyone who seemed financially reluctant in the discussions. The end result of both the Jedi Master's death and this meeting would be, first, a true recognition of the threat posed by Chelta on the supply lanes from major fuel distributors. The second would be the unification of the largest propellant companies in the galaxy. A grand total of 96% of all fuel in the galaxy came from one company, now under Mr. Jetral's oversight, and of course from Tenebras and Plagueis. Thirdly, the Republic now had an unavoidable energy crisis at their hands. And lastly, but perhaps most importantly, there was a sign for the Jedi to take matters into their own hands. At the heart of the Jedi Temple, the Masters of the Council held a discussion. Their fallen comrade, a peer from this very council, had died. To investigate matters, Dooku and his first apprentice, Rael Everos, would be going to the Outer Rim. According to the reports from the Pike sponsor, it was a bounty hunter. The Jedi were obviously curious to know why a bounty hunter would be involved in this, but Dooku was the right choice for the mission in their eyes. He had done well with his investigative work in the past, and they believed it'd be no different here. Once the mission was assigned to Dooku and they left, the Council switched focus onto something else, perhaps more concerning. Their fellow colleague had suggested that they be wary of the Energy Immunity and Independence Commissions, but they couldn't do anything from outside the Republic. It was suggested that they try and change the Republic through whatever means necessary, but something just felt off about doing that. The Jedi didn't want to be directly involved in the Republic's dealings, but at this crucial time, maybe it wasn't the worst idea. Master Miknik Stodan, the current standing Master of the Order, suggested that they appoint a staff of Jedi to run a representative branch. Yoda shook his head in disagreement, but did so silently as his peer continued to express why this would work. Miknik foresaw a situation in which they were currently in, where the Senate actively tried to deplete their budget in favor of House spending, which never went anywhere positive. It was his understanding that with Jedi representatives, they could hold some power inside the Senate. That wasn't inherently selfish if their intentions were positive. One of the other members, Kaiski Kalost, from the other side of the room, concluded. She actually had an ally that, along with Master Verolan Jag, could run a powerful representative branch inside the Senate. It was worth a shot. The Chancellor might go for it if it would protect his legacy as Chancellor. Yoda sighed. He didn't want to bind the Republic and the Jedi together. It felt immoral. But in times like this, they needed to. They needed influence. It wasn't just with the threat of death having taken one of their lives, but the assurance that someone with a strong moral code was actually in control. Master Katri believed that they needed to do it. Eventually, Yoda was convinced, and the idea would be brought before the Chancellor. Unlike several other administrations before, Chancellor Gog Panther wasn't very cooperative with the Jedi Order. Most of his administration had been pushing them away from influence and shortening their leash. The budget the Senate provided for the Jedi Order had been nearly cut in half in the last 7 years. This was the first time more than 2 counselors had visited him since his inauguration. The Jedi weren't threatening him, but they wanted to make sure he understood this was a serious matter to them. Accompanying Yoda was Master of the Order Mygeeto, Verlin Jag, Kaski Kalost, and V. Lo. This was a showing that greatly concerned Chancellor Panther. His initial thoughts were a hostile takeover, but those fears were quickly put away by the Grand Master. Yoda quickly asked to know about the economic situation and how he planned to sow stability into the ranks of the Republic. Surely he knew that their economy couldn't handle this blow. Now, to preface, the Jedi weren't concerned because their investments in the market would fluctuate. They were here because a trade dispute with fuel could stop important humanitarian resources from reaching their intended targets. The whole system relied on it, and as they asked the Chancellor for a response, he had none. Immediately, the Jedi became suspicious. Master V. Lo, the Jedi who best understood the day-to-day politics of the Senate, asked why they weren't acting then. She had no doubt that a deal could be made, instead of trying to bait Queenie Logra. Queenie Logra was a part of a coalition of systems that had planets on major hyperspace lanes that fuel distributors went through. She blocked off those fuel distributors so she could make the most money on it. Now, he should know that the fuel tycoons understood the power they held. The Chancellor swiveled around in his chair, thinking back to the conversations he held with Hego Damas II. The hedge fund started in his own name was a promise, as long as the Chancellor allowed the economy to shift. His legacy might be temporarily ruined, but the enemy would forever be the tycoons. There were greater powers than he in the galaxy, and so the Jedi, who eagerly suggested getting themselves a seat inside the Senate, left Gog with a sheepish chuckle. He was a generational hater on the Jedi, but if they involved themselves with the Senate discussions, then they could lose more of their influence. Though the way the Jedi suggested their involvement, they'd be seen in the same light as the Mun representatives of the banking clan inside the Senate. The Jedi Order was a large entity that actively acted on galactic events. To Chancellor Panther, this was the perfect opportunity to bury the Jedi Order. They would become politicians and die by their votes. He could live with that. He pulled out his tablet and started writing out his immediate support for this legislation. They would have a new office created by the end of the week. He also suggested that they have a representative and senator ready to take the floor when he announces their arrival at the end of the day Senate discussion. They were then removed from his office. Master Mygeeto and V. Lo, with assistance from Verlin Jag, would be taking control over the situation. It was already decided that the Twi'lek Jedi Master that continuously informed the Council about Senate decisions would become the first senator. It was just a matter of providing her with a supporting cast. It's why Mygeeto took the opportunity. As Master of the Order, he couldn't spend all of his time inside the Senate, but he could provide her with allies that had good relationships inside the Senate. Plus, Master Stodan was already quite popular with many pro-Jedi senators. Their work had only just begun though. Out on the planet of Chelta, Dooku and Rael arrived to the site of the murder. CH-831 rolled up and warbled out a few sentences, and Dooku nodded. The young Jedi Knight with his first student was eager to get Rael some much needed experience. Investigations of this magnitude were hard to come by, so he asked his student for his thoughts. Rael looked at the chalked out silhouette of where the Mon Cala Jedi Master fell, and he suggested that they speak to the Queen. She might have intel. Dooku reminded his Padawan about the experience their colleague had with her. She was giving advice about the politics. This deal was likely over Jedi involvement. The individual they wanted to speak to was the Pike sponsor. They would use his knowledge as a bargaining chip. Rael apologized for not getting it, and Dooku smiled, leading them forward. He reminded his apprentice that this was the importance of learning. These lessons would become valuable to him at some point in his life. It was important to ingest as much information as possible. The two of them eventually found the sponsor, seated at a table inside of one of the castle's cantinas. Queenie Logra loved having extravagance and revelries around her at all times. It kept the life young in her eyes. This wasn't on the street, but it all started inside the cantinas and bars across the strip that led to the main corridors of a palace. Obviously, these people went back to their own places for such revelries. For a young Jedi, there were temptations everywhere, but he remained focused. Despite their target being a sponsor, who they found with relative ease, there was something else. Dooku spotted several important business figures roaming around. Of course, Mr. Jetral was one of them. He was bouncing in and out of bars, looking for the best drink and whoever he could entertain himself with for the rest of the night. The Jedi Master kept an eye on the individual and slipped down into the booth seat across from the pike. The man knew the Jedi were coming, but he didn't expect a Padawan to join them here. Regardless, the sponsor explained that if the Jedi wanted a chance at changing the fate of the Republic, something needed to be done about their chancellor. Some photos were passed across the table. Rael muttered under his breath that he didn't know people still use those. Physical documentation? Dooku examined the photos, looking at Panther following along with some of the people in Jetral's posse. There was more information though. The pike man knew the bounty hunter, and while he wasn't interested in ratting her out, he explained that she had connections back to important businessmen from Mygeeto, and even rumors to have connections back to the Grand Protectorate. Dooku asked with the word Malastare, and the sponsor nodded his head. An exchange was made, with a payment in Outer Rim credits going to the pike man. Rael wasn't sure what he missed, feeling that something had been negotiated while he was looking at the pictures. Dooku knew that the man planned on blackmailing them with images of the Jedi, cooperating with the pikes. So, once the man got up and walked away, Dooku told Rael to trail behind him. He would be meeting with Mr. Jetral himself. The two of them split up, leaving the apprentice to walk between crowds of wasted and plastered people, as his master found his way into a group of people soon to be brought together in revelry. Dooku had no intentions to see that come to fruition for himself, but it led back to Mr. Jetral's residence, a tower that overlooked the palace. The building was designed that way so Queen Ilogra could entice her victims from afar. It worked perfectly with Jetral. Not only was Chelta receiving a surplus of fuel canisters for use and distribution of their own, which would of course be a scam, but she was getting a piece of the cake as a whole. Whatever deal the Republic caved to, she would take a part of it. Not a large one, but enough to fill her hands with nicer rings and a neck with thicker diamonds. Inside the residence, as people started meshing together into masses of bodies, Dooku cornered Jetral in a different room. Due to the thumping of heavy basses and lights flashing just away from them, not a soul noticed their host had gone missing. Jetral wasn't sober, but he flirted with the Jedi Knight, trying to get this conversation to somewhere more relieving. Dooku, almost short of patience, forced Jetral to give him answers about who joined the power guild in the Outer Rim, who was supporting their power. The oligarch tilted his head in a hypnotic way, telling his darling that everyone wanted something. The price just had to be right. There were senators and members of the executive branch that wanted to take advantage of the economic turmoil. Create a problem, then fix it, after you've profited off of the losses. Dooku tried to get more out of him, but Jetral fell into the sink and demanded a less political discussion. Dooku knew he got what he could, and left a man to return to his party. Rael, on the other hand, followed the pike man into the Queen's residence by sneaking around pillars and using force speed to avoid the guards. The sponsor handed the new photographs of the Jedi interacting with him to the Queen, and she smiled. Just as he turned to walk away, Avmati slit the man's throat and pulled him into an adjacent room. Queen Ilogra thanked her dear for doing the work. The bounty hunter nodded her head. From the same room the Sith bounty hunter disappeared, another appeared. Tenebras, as Rogue is known, told the Queen that this information could be greatly valuable at this moment. She tilted her head to insinuate that he continue, and Tenebras explained that Chancellor Panther just added the Jedi to the Senate without a representative vote. Their relevance inside the Senate could prove to make them enemies of the state. The Chancellor only approved it, no one else voted on it. She nodded her head and flipped through the photos. What does it matter to him? Rogus, still managing his business persona, explained that Damask Holdings could turn the Jedi Temple into a headquarters for banking. It could become the People's Bank, the Bank of the Core, and she should know how much money she could make off of that. Ilogra rubbed her fingers together, accessorizing her already scintillating jewels. She turned to Rogus and told him that he should live a little. The Jedi weren't the threat he believed they were. Now, she told him to go be a good boy and disappear. The Sith Lord inside Mr. Gnome wanted to burn her silhouette to the throne with force electricity, but it couldn't. Not just yet. Despite what he wanted to believe, she was in a way right. Aside from having important influence over the major fuel tycoons, she was the gateway to trade within the core. She and a few other monarchs were the key to bringing the Republic down economically. If Tenebras killed her now, the Republic would rise, Chancellor Panther wouldn't destabilize trust in the government, and the fuel tycoons would jump at any deal given by the Senate, even if they could get more. He bowed to the Queen and walked away. She put the papers down and leaned her legs up to land across the other side of the throne. She told one of her maids to go and fetch the older Jedi. He was cute and she wanted a taste. Rael almost gagged, but he heard everything and quickly but quietly snuck out to meet with CH-831 and Dooku inside the Jedi shuttle. They had the answers, but they could not leave Chelta yet. The following few days would be very challenging for the Jedi Order. Aside from the information coming back from Dooku and his apprentice, Master Velo was already facing gridlock inside the Senate. Chancellor Panther intentionally forced the Jedi to look corrupt upon entry. He didn't directly say it, but he insinuated that they forced their way in because they needed representation. To play the role of a class act, he told them that they were welcome to the Rotunda despite such actions. That was the beginning of their problems. Master Velo, for example, wasn't permitted to join the ranks of the energy committees. It was said that the Jedi would frustrate the tycoons and worsen the problem. The Senate and the Republic couldn't afford that, especially with the embargoes. Even though the energy committees went out of their way to make sure the businesses could merge into a super monopoly on propellant, the effects of the embargo hadn't fully engulfed the population yet. As Chancellor Panther wanted, the Republic Reserve would use its fuel until the system started to fracture. Of course, there were attempts made by the government to find new fuel mines so they could own distribution, sell it at a premium, and call it Republic Fuel or something stupid like that, but they just couldn't find it. The entire process was meant to further isolate the oligarchs and the Senate from the everyday people. Just because propellant was rapidly disappearing didn't mean businesses couldn't increase their prices. If fuel was gone, then the price of goods had to go up, due to the cost of buying off-world supplies and transporting them. Or how about the need for rent? That should go up because it was more difficult for landlords to supply necessary maintenance without fuel in the market. All of it was simply burying an already weaker class and passing it off as Republic dominance against the Outer Rim. Chancellor Panther didn't call it an energy crisis, but the new era of Republic efficiency. As long as he played the part and the people bought it, that's all that really mattered to him. The Jedi Council was scarily aware of this, and they also understood, thanks to Dooku's intel, that they would be targeted. Yoda used this as a moment to explain that this is exactly why he didn't want them inside the Senate. But Master Stodan respectfully disagreed. If they could use this challenge to propel their image, then they would come out as the heroes of the situation. He had already been inside the executive structures this morning, and there was word that they could have a new energy panel if Master Velo could gather the support. This was still the time where the Jedi were revered, and while this political stunt wasn't liked by many, those who considered themselves pro-Jedi couldn't help but see the opportunity for their own votes. Throughout their introductory period, which every new representative needed to go through, Masters Velo and Stodan went out of their ways to make sure they met requirements for various commissions across the Senate. They had their plans to start the Republic Energy Panel, disguised as a pro-Republic Fuel Committee, but they were also given the chance to join the Interplanetary Hyperspace Panel, Trade Solutions Commission, and Board of Fuel Procurement. These three groups handled different facets of the propellant in the industry, and it was important for the Jedi to have their foot in the door. Having these two Jedi frequently around the Senate and executive buildings, well before the Jedi became representatives, also really helped. There were smear campaigns immediately pushed out by the big businesses, suggesting that votes be made to turn the Jedi Order into a taxable institution, but the energy crisis was more of a concern to the population. Pretty much any other time this would have worked, but right now, not really. Master Velo accompanied various senators around the building as she built up a reputation for herself as a pro-democracy senator, someone who could be a Jedi but also work for the betterment of the government and its constituents. There were many fears that the Jedi were simply looking to supply power back into the Order, but they weren't, and their key representation didn't display that at all. The Senate, of course, was a constant game of cat and mouse, but Velo, with Master Stodan and Jag in her corner, portrayed themselves as go-getters. This was their important moment. Much wouldn't really happen for the next few weeks either. The Republic would continue playing hardball with the fuel tycoons, and Mr. Jetral became CEO of the Intergalactic Fueling Conglomerate, or IFC. His position was backed by Queenie Logra, and the Jedi that had been on Chelta were instead stationed inside a modified consular cruiser led by Captain Lin of the Outland Region Security Force, i.e., one of the only military groups inside the entire Republic. This was not a hostile operation, and that's not why they were here. Dooku and Rael were simply staying with the captain rather than on Chelta with the Queen, especially after Dooku's bathroom encounter with Jetral, which the Queen knew about. All of the intel gathered by both of them had been aided by work done by another member of the High Council. The Trandoshan Jedi Master named Frimlu had been working out of the corporate sector since Masters Velo and Stodan joined the Senate. The information she collected revolved around shady business practices and aspirations from Damask Holdings. It was no coincidence that what Rael overheard Queenie Logra speak about was coming to fruition in the corporate sector. The northeast portion of the galaxy was directly influenced by large banking organizations. Damask Holdings didn't have significant power inside the Senate, and their dealings were clear markers that they were trying to become the central bank in the galaxy by taking over the Jedi Temple and turning it into a bank. It was a smart decision by backing the IFC, but there was something deeper at play here, as the Master Jedi suggested. The Council was actively going out of its way to discover secrets. These photos, for example, of Dooku and Rael were no longer on Chelta, they were simply missing. The duo of Kaski Kalost and Verlin Jag from the High Council were currently trailing Rugus Gnome on Mygeeto. Dooku's close encounter with the Queen after his bathroom incident with Jetral only happened so he could get a hold of the pictures, and she didn't have them. It was weird for the Jedi. It felt like everyone served some sort of higher influence or power in the galaxy, but no one would say who it was. There were connecting dots, but where did it begin and where did it end? No one could tell. Inside the Senate, Master Velo had gathered enough votes to create the Republic Energy Panel in hopes to slow down the growing economic crisis. With weeks having gone by, the Republic was falling slowly towards a recession. The IFC continued to refuse unfavorable deals presented by the Chancellor, especially with the embargo still in effect, and Chancellor Panther continued to watch his hedge fund grow. Hago Damask specifically handled investments of the Chancellor's, so that he could make the most profit off of this embargo situation, but this was the key the Jedi were missing. Velo was doing her work inside the Senate, and pushing for a more lucrative deal for the Republic, but it wasn't doing anything. The problem was how connected everything was. The Republic wouldn't just buy the IFC, plus they weren't selling because they just formed a tycoon. The Queen had dirt on the Jedi, but she wouldn't give it over to Chancellor Panther. The Republic was in an energy crisis, still pushing out embargoes without any distributors not named the IFC selling anything below a premium, and as a result, the economy stagnated into a standstill. The only ones with any influence in any of this were the Jedi, but they didn't have the support inside the Senate to make any major changes, especially to withholding the embargoes. Velo was a breath of fresh air for many senators, controlled by their own hubris, but it didn't change anything. The Sith plan was already turning the Republic inside out, and it was creating a pro-business sector inside the government that would abandon the population for profit. That's where Dooku's investigation with Rael turned around. Captain Lin in the Outland Region Security Force had an extra bonus of fuel, something to keep their patrol crafts moving, which was a little weird. Dooku wanted his apprentice off of Chelta, hence their presence inside the vessel. But if the Republic could afford to keep patrol crafts afloat, then there was something missing. By looking back through Chancellor Panther's pro-military bills to support groups like Outland Region Security, way before the energy embargoes, Dooku came to a conclusion. The Chancellor was directly involved with either the Queen, Jet Troll, the IFC, or the Rising Bank of Damask Holdings. Perhaps all of them. Rugus and Hego were positioning Damask Holdings to look like the bank that would save the Republic, basically buy them out of this recession. It's why they were slowly trying to vilify the Jedi, so that they could be forced from Coruscant and thus lose their influential power at the capital. In doing so, if Damask Holdings moved in, they would completely undo anything the intergalactic banking clans had done. The Chancellor, though, was trying to rush it before the population started calling for him, but it wasn't working. The Sith needed more time for all of this to play out, so the population had to feel the pain. The hedge fund for the Chancellor was doing better than anything else in the government, thanks to Hego and Rugus, but Panther was getting cold feet. The Jedi were frequenting the Senate, investigators were going out into the Outer Rim. He knew his legacy could be the one failure if the Jedi found out the truth. It's why he wanted the Outland Region Security Force to be so hyperactive in the Outer Rim. A deal was made with Mr. Jet Troll that he would supply fuel to these groups and leave them untouched so that they could continue their Chancellor-ordered investigations that didn't exist. Outlands had nothing to do with the investigation. The only one that knew anything was Captain Lin, but even he was out of the loop. He only knew because of the Jedi. What Dooku and Rael found is that the executive branch was attempting to cover up the IFC so that investors could make their profits. Outside of the main politics, there were many Sith-favored politicians that were aligning themselves with Damask Holdings and the IFC, so that once the Republic bounced back with a stronger banking conglomerate in its corner and a deal with the energy tycoon, they could be seen as the heroes. The Sith were attempting to completely overhaul the Republic with their own representation to oust the Jedi and gain control over the government without needing to become Chancellor. When Dooku came to the conclusion that something iffy was going down between Rugus and Hego, he sent a transmission to the Jedi Temple, and they were forced to act. As a side note, Captain Lin wasn't aware of this in the slightest. He, like every other Republic captain, just believed that they were being supplied with fuel so that they could protect the Republic from potential attacks, not that they were secretly covering up a plot to earn Panther hundreds of millions of credits and nationalize the fuel industry. The Sith wanted that end-to-end control, and they pretty much had it. All they had to do was pull the trigger at the right time. While the Jedi were responding to Dooku's conclusion by sending out a squad of their own to investigate the businessmen of Damask Holdings, Dooku himself returned to Chelta without his apprentice to threaten the Queen. Upon his arrival to the palace, Ev Mahdi would be waiting. The conversation started with a simple discussion, where the Queen asked if Dooku was finally back so she could get a better view, and he denied. She didn't really want to talk business. If he could, woo her, which she already admitted he had started doing, then they could discuss what he wanted after she got what she wanted. Finally, after losing his patience, he ignited his lightsaber. She wasn't thrilled with this, but, she's willing to try things out. Ev Mahdi, on the other hand, fired her rifle. Dooku blocked it just at the right moment, sending the shot back towards the bounty hunter. She rolled out of the way but stumbled from the ledge and tumbled towards the ground. Dooku used the Force to catch her, but lopped her back into a pillar. The Jedi Master started over towards the bounty hunter, as CH-831 warbled a taunt from behind his master. One of the guards readied his staff, but Ilogra wanted to watch. She wanted more, quite frankly. This was an obsessive person, who always got what she wanted, and if she couldn't have it, well then she wanted it more. Ev Mahdi pushed herself off the ground and away from Dooku, but he with the Force pulled her across the ground and thrusted a saber towards her neck, demanding to know answers. She squirmed until she unlatched a dagger and jabbed it at Dooku, who caught it with his available hand and accessorized the blade. The markings were in the Sith language, and he quickly got up, rushing from the throne room towards the Jedi shuttle on the main landing platform. He sent out a message, but it was already too late. On the ground, inside the headquarters of Damask Holdings, was the dead Frimlu. She had been cut down by Plagueis. His master, on the other side of the room, stepped away, colliding sabers with Berlin Jag, who stumbled into Tenebros's blade. The Sith Lord ripped his head off and fired electricity at Yoda, who blocked the fiery burst and sent it back towards his opponent. Behind him, the eager and powerful Plagueis jabbed down at a duo of Jedi. overpowering the first of them and slicing across his body to kill the other. The room was filled with 12 Jedi, all of them converging on Mygeeto to discuss Damask Holdings' business in the corporate sector. Dooku's message was clearly important, but it didn't make it here in time to change how the Sith reacted once they were cornered. Yoda spun around Tenebras, using the Force to launch the Sith Lord from his feet, as 2 more Jedi swung in for the student's body. Plagueis wiped one of them off the ground and parried the other, leaving Yoda and Kasky to join together for an attack on Tenebras. Brimlu's hologram buzzed from her dead body, but no one could hear it over the sound of lightsabers. Tenebras struck down at the Grand Master, hoping to end his life, but Yoda leapt over the strike with the Force and pulled Tenebras' saber. This didn't remove it from his hand, but it lagged his strike, giving Kasky the assist. She swept her saber where Tenebras was swinging, and instead cut him in half. Yoda delivered the final blow, just as they turned around to watch Plagueis lift Mygeeto Dodan off the ground. The Jedi Counselor kicked his legs to break free, while defending himself from Plagueis' strike. Their weapons buzzed and he pressed off, but not before Plagueis took one of his horns. Mygeeto rolled across the ground, raising his emerald saber as Yoda lunged in. Plagueis turned back to deflect the strike, but was thrown backwards. He didn't fall, but regained his feet as Kasky swung in. Plagueis eyed the strike to his hand, blasting her backwards and sending electricity into another Jedi Master's face, as Yoda spun into Plagueis' range. He slipped under a strike, flipping onto a nearby table and leaping off of it, to cut the Sith apprentice across the jaw. Plagueis dropped to the ground, and Master Stoden plunged his saber through the Sith's back, killing him instantly. The communication from Dooku finally made it to them, albeit a little bit late. But there was a plus side. They knew that the photos of Dooku and Rael interacting with the Pike sponsor could be burned and forgotten in time. They were inside this boardroom. That, though, would be only one piece to the puzzle, as the Jedi had a whole plot to reveal and expose to the entire galaxy. It would take several days to gather all the information. The survivors on Mygeeto, investigators from the corporate sector, plus Dooku and Rael from Chelta, had to put their answers into a presentable format. These were businessmen. The galaxy had to have a reason to care about what they were doing. The energy crisis was actively hurting people, and they wanted to be able to travel without worrying about every single ounce of propellant being put into their vessel. Master Velo, with the singular-horned Master of the Order, would present their case to the Galactic Republic in a Senate session watched by billions. It was suggested that this session would end the crisis. It was one of those moments in galactic history where everyone tuned in. The population was desperate, the supply chain was hurting, and so every other business in the galaxy upped their prices, which people couldn't afford. This moment would define how the Republic handled the onset of a recession. And then, the newly added Jedi representatives would tell the galaxy about the Great Lie. With distribution being limited by systems in line with Chelta and Queenie Logra, the formation of the IFC as a monopolized conglomerate under Mr. Jetral, funding from Damask Holdings, and finally, the support of Chancellor Panther, the Republic was being carefully navigated into a self-sustaining recession. The Jedi revealed that the whole purpose of this embargo was to make the rich richer, and force everyone else to suffer as a result. There were promises from Chancellor Panther about the benefits of the situation, but of course these were hollow. The Jedi would go into great detail about how everything was interconnected, even revealing Panther's hedge fund. And at the end, Master Velo would reference Old Republic laws and the alliance Chancellor Panther built with a sect of Force sorcerers called the Sith. Due to the mass hysteria of the betrayal, many forgot about what the Sith were, but enough remembered that when the changes were made, they'd be included in new laws. But at the end of the day, the irony would be that the Sith plan, in some way, came to fruition, as the Republic would end up nationalizing the IFC. It just wouldn't get representation. And, well, thanks to the Republic Energy Panel, Master Velo would have direct oversight over the IFC as a nationalized product. By exposing this corrupt network, and the Senate giving the Jedi approval to arrest Mr. Jetral and his network of goons working for the IFC, the Republic was able to lift the embargo and end the holdout. The Chancellor would be taken away by the Senate Commando Unit and face capital punishment for sending the economy into a tailspin for personal gain. While the Jedi were never meant to be a part of the Republic, it would be the case presented by Master Velo and Sto Dan that would change the minds of the galaxy. The Sith being destroyed was a start, but still so much work needed to be done. There were other mega corporations with incredible influence over the Republic, still with seats inside the Senate, and they needed to be regulated. But the Jedi had some ideas for that. The Rising Federation would be an easy target, due to their connection back to Damask Holdings. The other groups, much different story. The public, because of Velo, grew a deep appreciation for the Jedi Order. They had changed a dire situation into one that could be controlled, even one that eventually became more profitable. There would be some legislation to spite the Sith, but for the everyday citizens of the Republic, their fuel returned, and it wouldn't be sold at a premium as originally planned. The government also had to undergo vast change to ensure a situation like this couldn't happen again. At the center of it all, though, was the Jedi Order. Not only would the Order remain in prominence, but their representatives held the foundation of the Republic together. Velo inspired many Jedi to aspire for roles around her representative cabinet, leading to generations of continuous Jedi and Republic cooperation. With that, the Jedi, at the heart of the Republic, would maintain a functional government, not only for the Republic, but soon for the entire galaxy. And that, my friends, is our C-SPAN story. Special thanks to the patrons for supporting the channel. Smash that like button. Let's talk about this story. This one was a much different take on the C-SPAN style. Typically I spend a lot of time with the Senate and all that stuff going inside there. I wanted this story to be like multifaceted. I wanted a lot to be going on. I wanted to have this really dark and kind of grimy underworld on Chelta with the Queen Ilogra, and then I wanted to have like this plot that's all interconnected. It was so hard to put this together, so I really hope I did it justice, because I may have confused myself a couple times while writing this, but I really wanted the plot to be Chancellor Hedge Fund, Plagueis and Rugus trying to set it all up, the IFC becoming this major tycoon conglomerate, kind of like the Federation, and then Ilogra stopping the fuel tycoons from trading with the Republic by kind of closing down her airspace. This story was very challenging to write, if I'm being honest, but I think it turned out really well. I really didn't want this story to be focused in the Senate. There's a lot of ways this could have been focused in the Senate, but I thought it'd be more interesting to kind of do like the origin story and kind of show the Jedi gaining prominence by earning respect, and that, you know, obviously Master Velo becomes the face of the Jedi Order in many ways, but it's like the build up. It's like all these little minor parts that play up and build up to the Jedi becoming this representative force in the Republic that kind of the Republic owes everything to. Without the Jedi, like, this would have fallen apart and blown up in their faces. I wanted this to both be a big mystery, but also a big C-SPAN story, and I think they meshed well together in this story, so I'm very excited to see how you guys liked it. But I love you guys, spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.